So we are less than 1 week out from the resignation of Scott Pruett, the former head of the EPA, and so it's probably too early to know for sure exactly where the EPA is going to go from here. But we can also guess based on its past actions and what we know right now about its new acting head, Andrew Wheeler, who could well become the permanent leader of the EPA under Donald Trump. Joining the show now to help break down the EPA's recent actions and where we can expect it to go from here is Lucas Ross, Senior Policy Analyst at Friends of the Earth, an international network of environmental organizations in 74 countries. Welcome to the show, Lucas.
Thanks for having me, John.
Very glad to have you here to lend some of your expertise to us. I'd like to start with Scott Pruett, no longer the head of the EPA, but he was there for long enough to do quite a bit of damage. Of the various things that he did, the regulation changes and all of that, what has you most worried for the environment?
I think that with Scott Pruett, you have a number of things. There was an attempt under his administration for 18 months to basically dismantle everything that the EPA does. There has never been a fox guarding the henhouse quite like Scott Pruett. He went after climate protections, he went after clean air protections, and he went after the use of sound science at EPA. And all the while, he had the door wide open to pretty much every single regulated industry that he was supposed to be in charge of regulating. So now that he's gone, there are a number of questions about what happens next and what do we do to dismantle the progress he made towards destroying our environmental protections. And I think the most immediate thing that we need to acknowledge is that he was one of the most ridiculously corrupt people ever to serve in government. And I think in a way, he answers a question for us, how do you get kicked out of an administration for being too corrupt that is itself founded on corruption? I mean, you have to be at least as corrupt as Scott Pruett. But the question becomes, because he was involved in so many really problematic dealings, his cheap condo rental, attempting to get his wife a Chick-fil-A franchise, sending a security detail for hand lotion. I mean, we don't know the full extent of the corruption at EPA. And until we do, it is absolutely unconscionable to allow any piece of policy that he touched while he was administrator to proceed. It needs to be frozen in its tracks. His efforts to peel back the Clean Power Plan, his efforts to deregulate the clean water in the US, his efforts to make our cars dirtier and to make consumers pay more for less efficient vehicles. All of these things are basically balls that he started rolling as administrator. And what needs to happen now is we need to know how deep the rot went while he was in charge. There is no way that any of these rules can proceed without a clear accounting of exactly how corrupt he was.
Well, as of right now, it looks like Andrew Wheeler is, so he's the acting head. Everything that I've read about him leads me to believe that at least until we stop him, he will continue those balls rolling, as you say. If he does become the permanent head of the EPA, what do you think the EPA will look like in 2 years or so? Will it have actually changed direction from where Scott Pruett was bringing it, or is it largely continuing in the same way?
Yeah, so let's talk about Andrew Wheeler, Andy, as Trump called him in the introductory tweet. I have no idea how this idea that Andrew Wheeler would become a moderate compared to Scott Pruett came from. I think it's just purely a Washington thing. They see Andrew Wheeler as a Washington operator, so other Washington people think somehow he's going to be more like them because he's the sort of guy they would meet at a cocktail party. No, it's not true at all, and we need to put that out there immediately. Andrew Wheeler is a coal lobbyist. Andrew Wheeler is a climate skeptic, and for over 10 years, Andrew Wheeler was the right-hand man of James Inhofe, the most prominent climate denier in the Senate, and the guy who brought a snowball onto the floor of the Senate to prove that global warming wasn't real. So any idea that he's going to be a massive change from Scott Pruett is just totally unfounded.
So I want to focus on one area in particular, and that is climate change. We know that a number of the regulatory changes that Scott Pruett presided over directly impacts the ability of the US to combat ongoing climate change. I can also think of things like the new tariffs on solar equipment that Donald Trump put in place. What do you think about in that particular area? How bad has the damage been over the past year and a half?
So unpeeling regulations like Scott Pruett was doing under EPA is a long and legally complicated process. He started the process of damaging the Clean Power Plan, fuel efficiency for vehicles, the regulation of the super pollutant methane from oil and gas wells. All of these were accomplishments under the Clean Air Act that were important steps in the right direction for climate change. And he basically made an effort to take the axe to all of them. But the process hasn't started, and it could take years. The thing that has me concerned, and that should really have everyone concerned, is that the single best way to destroy Scott Pruitt's progress would be to keep Brett Kavanaugh off of the Supreme Court. Now, we know that Kavanaugh is alarming for so many reasons, for women's rights, for LGBTQ rights, but his record on the environment is really pretty terrifying too. He's ruled against the EPA and tried to narrow its policy scope many times, and there is absolutely no reason to believe that on the court he wouldn't try to damage the sort of bedrock enforcement of our environmental laws that have been on the books for 40 years. So if we really want to damage Scott Pruitt's progress, if we want to dismantle that legacy, the fight needs to be to keep Kavanaugh off of the court.
Yeah, these things certainly do tie together in scary ways. I have one final question for you. So for concerned environmentalists who aren't elected officials, people who might be watching this video, what concrete steps can they take under Andrew Wheeler while Donald Trump is president to try to stall some of the damage, to reverse it if possible? What can they do?
There has been a fundamental failure on Congress's part when it comes to corruption at the EPA. By the end, and this is an important number, it's a number that stays with me, after over a dozen investigations into his corruption, only 5 Republicans in the House of Representatives had come out in favor of Scott Pruitt losing his job. That's after months and months of headlines. And it was a choice that they made to be comfortable with his corruption so long as he continued to deliver on policy. If we want to stop Andrew Wheeler at the EPA, we need to make sure that members of Congress aren't just going to give him a pass, that he's not going to get some kind of fresh start, he's not going to be able to just continue Scott Pruitt's work without missing a beat. Recess is coming up. If you see your member of Congress, you should yell at them. You should tell them that it's totally unacceptable to allow Andrew Wheeler to continue Scott Pruitt's work. Tell them that you're watching them. Tell them that you aren't going to accept anything less than total accountability on everything that Andrew Wheeler does at EPA.
Oh, they should certainly add that to the long list of reasons they should be shouting at their elected officials.
Fair point.
Yes. Thank you, Lucas Ross, for joining us today. Lucas Ross, Senior Policy Analyst at Friends of the Earth. We appreciated your perspective.
Thanks for having me.